Without objection.
Madam President, I'm pleased that my friend Senator McConnell and I have been able to reach an agreement to approve a number of judicial nominations in the coming weeks. The senior senator from Vermont, Chairman Leahy, has kindly added his wisdom to make this a better agreement, and for that I'm very grateful. This is a victory for our nation's justice system. While I still believe the Senate should confirm all these nominations this afternoon to address the judicial vacancy crisis we face in this country, the step forward is one we should all feel good about. The Senate will hold up or down votes on 7 district court judges before the end of this work period. We'll vote on another 5 district court and 2 circuit court nominations by Monday, May 7th. Among the 14 judges, the Senate will consider Miranda Dew. Miranda Dew is a very well-known lawyer in Nevada. But the interesting thing about this good woman is she is a representative of a true American success story. She was born in Vietnam. And at the end of the war in Vietnam, people who were of Vietnamese ancestry could not leave if they were full-blooded Vietnamese. If you weren't, as Miranda was, they let them go. And she left Vietnam with her family in a boat when she was just 8 years old. She was in refugee camps, and finally, when she was 11 years old, wound up in Alabama, not, of course, speaking any English, with her family. She speaks, not that it matters, but without a single trace of any accent. She's just such a good lawyer, and she is, and I was so happy when I introduced her before the Judiciary Committee at her hearing. Her parents were there, her family was there. It was really a wonderful opportunity to see what America's all about. As I've indicated, she has extensive litigation experience and enormous love and appreciation for Nevada. I look forward to confronting this woman with such a tremendous dedication to public service. Approving 14 new judges speaks to the progress we can make when we here in the Senate work together. More work remains to fill all the nation's vacant judicial seats and ease the backlog of cases in our courts. We can't jeopardize the right to a fair and speedy trial for 160 million Americans who now live in districts with judicial vacancies. Some of them are even have judicial vacancies that are emergencies. It's crucial that bipartisan cooperation continue and the pace of confirmations move forward. With 1 in 10 federal judgeships vacant in our country, more delays would circumvent the will of the people. The American Bar Association says the shortage of judges and the backup in our courts is, quote, bad for business, it's unfair to individuals, and it ultimately costs taxpayers money, end of quote. So this shortage of judges is also unnecessary. I'm pleased, I repeat again, that there's been agreement to confirm these 14 judges without wasting any more of the Senate's time. I think we can all agree, regardless of political party, that we must act quickly on the small business jobs bill passed overwhelmingly by the House. Democrats are eager to move this bill forward, which will improve innovators' access to capital and streamline how companies sell stock. Democrats will also introduce bipartisan legislation to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank, referred to as Ex-Im Bank, which will create 300,000 jobs and generate more than $1 billion in new revenue for our country. The minority leaders have supported the Export-Import Bank in the past. This legislation also has the support totally of the National Chamber of Commerce. So it will build on the important work we've done this week to help create jobs. It isn't a 2.8 million job creator like our highway bill, but it's an important piece of legislation to allow capital formation to be made much more rapidly. Today the Senate passed, as I've indicated, this transportation jobs bill that is such a job creator that it's one of the rare occasions we have here in the Senate where we can really look to creating, with one vote, millions of jobs. And we also, of course, today, as I've just indicated, reached a bipartisan agreement to ease the delays in our nation's courts. Passing a small business jobs bill that helps companies expand and export their products would be yet another bipartisan accomplishment the Senate can be proud of. To that, I refer the At.am Bank. I appreciate my friend from Iowa being patient. It seems that there are times when he wants to really speak. Sometimes I don't know he's coming, but it seems I show up at about the same time.
The senator from Iowa.
Before I ask permission to speak as if in morning business, I don't disagree with anything that the majority leader says, but I would like to bring these facts out about judicial vacancies. There are 88 judicial vacancies, and some of those are emergency. In the case of the emergencies, and I don't have the number for the ones that are emergencies, but only about half of those have had names suggested to us by the President of the United States. And in the case of the total of 88 vacancies, the President has only set up 43 nominees for those 88 vacancies. So I want to make it very clear, and it's something that's quite obvious, that the United States Senate or any of its leaders can't expect the Senate to act upon vacancies where there aren't nominees, because we have to wait until the President sends somebody up before we review and before we can vote on them. And I think that it's easy to make it Republicans look bad, and it's intended to make Republicans look bad when they use those vacancies as a statistic without making it clear that the President of the United States is the one that is dragging feet as far as filling those vacancies. And then if they get up here and we don't act on them, then obviously we're the ones that are responsible for that. Now I would ask unanimous consent to speak 25 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Yeah. Madam President, one or two times a year, out of the many speeches I give on the floor of the Senate, I report to my colleagues on a crusade that I have to wake up the Department of Defense to give more respect to audit reports coming out of the Inspector General's office. And in the last 2 years, I've been very critical. And I'm somewhat critical now, but there's been vast improvement by the Department of Defense in responding to their use of and the quality of their audits. So I'm coming to the floor once again to report on the latest results of my ongoing audit oversight review. And I'll refer to some figures, but to kind of give you an overview, for the last 3 years, we've roughly reviewed in my office, between 100 and 120 audit reports. So, 3 years of each year, somewhere between 100 and 120. And the reason that I emphasize you have all those reports, they have recommendations in them, and we've seen a reluctance to move ahead to carry out the results of those audits, and in so many instances we'd save so much money if the audit reports were carried out. And when you spend $100 million every year in the Inspector General's office of the Department of Defense, you would expect that you ought to get some results from that $100 million expenditure. And we're seeing some improvement. Our work examines audits issued by the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Defense. After receiving anonymous letters in early 2009 alleging mismanagement of audit resources, I and my staff initiated an in-depth oversight review. This is my third report in that series. Its goal of the report is to assess audit quality in 2011 and make recommendations for improvements. I'm doing this work for one important reason. Like investigations, audits are a primary oversight tool. In fact, audits may be the most important tool. That is because the auditor's core mission is to watchdog how the taxpayers' money is being spent in the Department of Defense. That puts them on the money trail 24/7. If fraud is occurring, that's where it will happen. That's where they need to be, and hopefully the auditors will find it. These audits cost the taxpayers, as I said before, roughly $100 million a year. Are the auditors getting the job done? Are they rooting out waste, fraud, and as a result, are they attempting to save the taxpayers' money? My first report was published on September the 7th, 2010. Clearly indicated that the audit oversight capabilities of the Inspector General's office were seriously degraded. The Inspector General at that time, Gordon Heddell, responded to my first report in a very constructive way. He promptly approved a transformation plan designed to improve audit quality. In order to assess progress on reforms, I issued a second report January 1st last year. I called this one a report card. It evaluated and graded 113 reports issued during fiscal year 2010. I awarded those 113 reports a grade of D-. The low overall score was driven by the very same deficiencies pinpointed in my first report. Instead of being hardcore, fraud-busting contract audits, most reports were policy and compliance reviews. There was little or no attempt to even verify the exact dollar impact of the misguided policies examined. Such reports offered zero benefit to the taxpayer, though many of these reports were mandated by the Congress of the United States. I identified out of those 113 reports 27 good reports that involved commendable and credible, and in some cases, nitty-gritty audit work. Were it not for their long completion times, all of those 27 reports would have earned very top scores. At the conclusion of the second report, my staff presented a list of the top 9 audit roadblocks standing in the way of reform. After the second report was issued, Inspector General Heddell issued a sharp rebuttal, disagreeing with me very much. He complained that I did not give sufficient credit for 18 audits that identified $4 2/10 billion in potential monetary benefits. I addressed Inspector General Heddell's criticism on the floor of this Senate on 2 separate occasions, July 5th and July 28th last year. At that time, I admitted that he had a legitimate gripe about my report. My staff reviewed the matter and upped the score on 12 of the 18 reports, but those adjustments did not move the overall score of the 113 reports out of that D range. Today, I am issuing my third audit oversight report. This one examines the latest batch of reports, the 121 reports issued between October 1st, 2010 and September 30th, 2011. They're known as the fiscal year 2011 audits. I'm giving those reports an overall score of 3.51, or C. As my report indicates, there was an across-the-board improvement in every category except one, timeliness. I'm very happy to report to my colleagues that audits quality appears to be improving. The best possible indicator of improvement is the doubling of top-rated reports. Those numbers jumped from 27 reports, or 25% of the total in the year 2010, to 70 reports, or 58% of the total production last year. That's better than a twofold increase. The auditors have achieved a breakthrough. The apparent progress is promising. The most important area of improvement in audit quality was in the strength of the recommendations. There was a surge in this key area. It was propelled by calls for accountability and recovery of wasted money. Though modest and limited in number, these initiatives had force. Recommendations are the business end of an audit, and these recommendations were based on rock-solid findings. At least 50 reports of the 121 arrived at findings that documented flagrant mismanagement, waste, negligence, fraud, and even potential theft. 16 of these reports recommended that responsible officials be considered for administrative review. A comparable number contained recommendations for the recovery of improper payments, and 10 reports, largely those on stimulus projects coming out of the $814 billion stimulus bill that was voted on in February of 2009, recommended, on those 10 reports, recommended that wasteful projects be terminated. These reports jumped out at me, as I hope they would you if you read these. They're quite remarkable, but 50 reports with rock-solid findings should generate 50, not just 16 set of hard-hitting recommendations. So I'm sorting out 16 out of the 15 for special recognition. These 50 reports add up to a good beginning, but they don't confer world-class status on the Inspector General's Audit Office. Within the grand totality of the 121 reports published in 2011, they are a drop in the bucket. The vast majority of reports still offer weak recommendations. Most reports merely instruct audit targets to do what they are already required to do under law and regulation. In my opinion, that's a waste of ink and paper. There are still 4 distinct trouble spots needing intense management attention. The biggest problem continues to be the number of unsatisfactory reports. While I can no longer say that most reports were poor, at 40%, the proportion of low-scoring reports remains unacceptably high. Those reports continue to suffer from the same deficiencies identified in a report commissioned by Inspector General Hodel in response to my first report 3 years ago. This report was produced by 2 independent consulting firms and dated October the 7th, 2010. It is known as the Quest Report. Their conclusion, which matched my own, were as follows, quote, "We do not believe audit is selecting the best audits to detect fraud, waste, and abuse. Your organization does not audit what truly needs to be done. Some audits hold little value in the end." End of quote from the Quest report. As I have said many times, far too many audits offer little or no benefit to the taxpayers. That was still true in 2011. Long audit production times remain another big problem. Old reports offer stale information that weakens the power and relevance of audit reports. Between 2010 and 2011, the average time needed to complete reports jumped from 13 months to 16 months. And as I understand it, those numbers don't tell the full story because they do not include the extra weeks or months reportedly needed for the planning and approval process that occurs before an audit even begins. Add those numbers together, and you're really looking at probably 1.5 years to publish a completed audit. Stale information reduces audit impact to 0 over a period of time. The Quest report previously referred to pinpointed the root cause of this problem. Quote, "It is apparent that in the planning phase of audit selection, audits are written to fit a team as opposed to a team established to conduct the needed audit." End of quote. Such organizational inflexibility drives long completion times. It also leads to the publication of audits having objectives that are so narrow and limited in scope that they're virtually worthless. Audit teams need to be organized to support more challenging and more relevant audit tasks. And Mr. Blair indicated recently that he was moving in this direction. There are two other outstanding problems. Far too few reports, just 9 in all, verified actual payments using primary source accounting records. Failing to nail down exact dollar amounts of waste and mismanagement, including those resulting from misguided policies, ends up undermining the credibility and completeness of audit reports. Give you an example. Using invoices and contracts to estimate payments would not appear to meet the most stringent audit standards. A more acceptable procedure is essential because the Defense Finance and Accounting Services' long-standing track record of making erroneous and unauthorized payments. In the face of such sloppy accounting practices, verification of payments should be mandatory. Lastly, referral rates to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, the DCIS, are still far too low. Only 5 reports generated potential criminal referrals, which appears to point to a lack of concern about fraud. Surely there was enough grist in the 50 reports which documented egregious waste and misconduct to warrant additional referrals to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service and/or the Justice Department. A number of audits stand out as candidates for further review and possible prosecution. I have urged Secretary Panetta and Acting Inspector General to re-examine some of these issues. Acting IG Hellbrooks has put the public spotlight on disgraceful and scandalous waste and alleged misconduct that demands accountability. Unfortunately, unless the recommendations in those hard-hitting audits are somehow converted to concrete action, all this good work will amount to nothing more than a bunch of auditors howling in the wilderness. It will simply fall through the cracks. Converting tough recommendations into concrete action takes determination, and it takes relentless follow-up. The key is making such agencies do what they agreed to do at the conclusion of an audit. However, all indications suggest that corrective actions proposed in 16 hard-hitting reports have run into some serious roadblocks in the Pentagon bureaucracy. Without high-level intervention, in other words, eliminating those roadblocks in the Pentagon bureaucracy, most, if not all, accountability and savings measures could be slowly and quietly squashed in bureaucracy. A recent report from the Navy surely indicates that this phase awaits at least one of those 16 reports and probably all the others as well. In order to assist in the audit resolution process, I have asked Secretary Panetta to conduct a top-level review of all the allegations contained in those 16 most disturbing reports out of the 121 that we looked at in this last year. I urge the Secretary to establish a reasonable path forward on all unresolved recommendations until there are meaningful consequences and real penalties for such gross waste and misconduct. The culture of the organizations involved will not change. In other words, that culture going to perpetuate lack of concern and action on the recommendations of these auditors, because in a bureaucracy, not just the Department of Defense, but if heads don't roll, you're not going to see any change in the culture. Without accountability, there will be no positive results. Good audit value will go down the drain. Unabated waste of the taxpayers' money will continue. Clearly, significant progress was achieved between 2010 and 2011, but the Inspector General's audit capabilities are not yet out of the woods. Much more work remains to be done. Management needs to build on the strengths exemplified by the 50 reports containing rock-solid findings and 16 sets of hard-hitting recommendations. Those reports could be used as models or building blocks for improving audit quality in the future. In order to start producing more top-quality reports, management needs to consider the following suggestions, of which I have 8. Bring report recommendations into balance with the findings. Increase calls for accountability and recovery of improper payments. Verify all payments using primary source accounting records. Organize audit teams to match more complex and challenging tasks. Pick up the pace of fraud referrals to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Develop a more effective audit follow-up strategy. And lastly, follow up to ensure that prosecutions occur where warranted or necessary. These adjustments should be achieved using available resources. Correct these problems, and top-quality reports will be the norm. All these goals are within easy reach. Once accomplished, audits will be fully aligned with the core mission of the Inspector General. In closing, I want all the auditors in the Inspector General's office to know that I consider their oversight mission to be one of the highest importance. There is nothing more important to the taxpayers than having an aggressive team of auditors watchdogging how the taxpayers' money is being spent. I know there has been a concerted effort over the past few years to improve the quality of their work. I deeply respect, deeply appreciate, and will support these efforts. They're starting to pay off. I can see results of all the hard work. I encourage all the auditors to keep moving ahead until the job is finished. And I urge Mr. Blair to unleash the auditors. I want them to be a tiger, encouraging them to call waste what it is, waste. Let them follow their instincts and the guidance in their audit manuals that instruct them, quote, think, fraud, and plan audits to provide a reasonable assurance of detecting fraud, end of quote. I yield the floor, and I guess I'll suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Acosta.
I'd ask unanimous consent the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Madam President, I've come to the floor to speak about an opportunity to expand access to capital for small businesses by lifting what is an arbitrary limit on credit unions' ability to serve small businesses. I've done this on a number of occasions over the last couple of years, so the President knows that this is a cause that's important to me. But it's important to me because there's a phenomenon in our country where small businesses are starving for credit, yet the federal government is still standing in their way. And I'm talking about the smallest of small local businesses. These are the men and women who need $50, $100, or maybe even $200,000 to move from their garage to a retail storefront, to renovate their sales floor, or to upgrade their equipment and expand. They're often too small to be worth a bank's time, or they just don't fit the lending guidelines of the bank's corporate headquarters. But these small business owners know credit unions in their community that have money to lend, and these credit unions truly want to help. They probably see each other at Little League games, at church, they play cards together, they socialize. But instead of being able to offer these bridge loans that the small local business needs, the credit unions end up saying, sorry, we really want to help you, but the federal government has set a limit on how many businesses we can loan funds to. Now, we're moving to the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, or the JOBS Act, if you follow the acronym, that the House passed last week. That bill is aimed at increasing the availability of credit to startup companies by expediting and easing the process of undergoing an IPO, an initial public offering. I think that's a noble goal, especially as our economy still struggles to create jobs. But the problem is we're still leaving the little guys behind, the people in each and every one of our neighborhoods that want to expand their businesses and hire people as soon as possible. And unfortunately, the JOBS Act is aimed at companies with revenue under $1 billion. Let me repeat, billion with a B. These companies may well need help with IPOs, but I'm talking about offering relief to traditional Main Street businesses. So in light of this, I'm still committed to allowing credit unions to increase the amount of money they can lend to small businesses. So I will once again introduce the bipartisan Small Business Lending Enhancement Act as an amendment which would open up additional credit to small businesses without costing taxpayers a dime. Now, I know the President has many small, wonderful towns in her state, and I want to where you see many small business owners. I want to talk about a couple of the business owners in my state of Colorado. Stacy Hammond is a Coloradan. She owns the First Street Salon in Thornton. She got turned away by a bank because her loan was too small to be worth the risk. She went to her credit union. They wanted to help her. They helped her. She opened a larger business, and she's created jobs in the process. I'm also talking about people like Lisa Herman of Broomfield, Colorado. She is the co-owner of Happy Cakes Bake Shop in Denver's Highland Square, and she needed a loan to expand and cater more weddings. She was turned away from her bank, but she went to her local credit union, and that credit union was able to provide her with the loan she needed to continue to grow her successful business and hire more Coloradans. Stacy and Lisa don't need a billion-dollar IPO. They need a small bridge loan. We could be making an enormous difference, a huge difference in these local communities with mere pennies on the dollar of what the JOBS Act is focused on. Yet my amendment would be the only single piece of the JOBS Act that would actually help small businesses or directly create jobs. Put simply, credit unions specialize in these small business loans. In fact, the average credit union small business loan is just $219,000. And in contrast, the Federal Reserve have told us that many banks have quit considering loans under $200,000 because they're just not worth their time. Credit unions know these small business owners, and they have money to lend to them. Unfortunately, federal law still limits the amount that small business loans a credit union can extend to 12% of their assets. Nearly 350 credit unions are facing this cap, and over 500 are having to slow down or stop their business lending altogether, I should say. I mean, that's hard to believe. It just seems like such a missed opportunity. In effect, we in government are telling these financial institutions that they cannot help create jobs in their local communities. That's why my amendment would double the amount of money that credit unions can offer small businesses. Now let me turn to my friends in the banking sector. We've heard from banks over the years that they think it's unfair to have to compete with the credit unions. But the fact is, this isn't about banks or credit unions. It's about small business. And these financial institutions, quite frankly, serve very different small business populations. Credit unions serve the smallest of small businesses, who often must resort to relying on credit cards with comparatively high interest rates in order to invest in equipment to grow their businesses. These are business owners who have been turned away or ignored, by and large, by banks. We're talking about new loans to new and growing small businesses. After over 100 years of lending to small businesses, credit unions today only represent 5 to 6% of all small business loans, I should say, small business loans. Even if increasing the limit on credit union lending were to double their market share, banks would still have 90% of the market to themselves. Now, I've also heard the banks say that this proposal is unproven or somehow an unsound way of increasing small business loans. But the truth is that credit unions have been making small business loans since their inception in the early 1900s. That's, by my math, over 100 years. And it wasn't until 1998 that there were any limits whatsoever on how much they could lend. The credit union's own regulator, the National Credit Union Administration, has endorsed lifting or even eliminating the small business lending cap. The NCUA chairman testified before Congress that, quote, increased business lending is good not only for the credit union, but also for its members and the communities in which the credit union operates, end of quote. I got to say, I'm frustrated because I think why can't we agree on uninhibited small business support, growth, and job creation? Let's not let the squabbles between banks and credit unions keep these jobs from out-of-work Americans. Madam President, I'm going to begin to conclude, and I want to acknowledge that we passed earlier today a bipartisan transportation bill. And in the so doing, we voted on everything under the sun, from contraception to privatizing rest stops. So I sure hope we can have an open amendment process and include this important piece, this important amendment, this important legislation that would help small businesses. And after all, if we're going to tell the American people that this bill is about increasing access to capital, we've heard that said over and over again, this is about access to capital, we sure better be willing to start with those small business owners on Main Street. Colorado common sense, New Hampshire common sense could prevail, and we ought at least have a chance to consider this important issue, debate this idea on the floor of the Senate, and I hope included in the Jobs Act, because access to capital is what's needed right now, and the credit union sector is willing and able to do so. Madam President, thank you for your attention. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Colorado.
Madam President, I'd ask consent the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, thank you. I ask unanimous consent the period for morning business be extended until 7 p.m., the time equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
That suggests the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Okaka.